The Appalachian Trail stretched out before Mark, winding through the dense wilderness like an ancient path to the soul of nature itself. For 22 years, he had cherished the wild beauty of the great outdoors, and now, 3 weeks into his backpacking journey, he was entering the most desolate portion of the trail. A soft, midday sun filtered through the thick canopy of leaves, dappling the forest floor with a gentle play of light and shadow. With each step, Mark's boots crunched on fallen leaves and twigs, the soft cadence of a solitary hiker. He had always loved the simplicity of camping, the solitude of hiking alone. And this trip was meant to be the perfect culmination of his adventures so far. His trusty backpack bore the essentials: freeze-dried meals, mac and cheese, fettuccine alfredo, beef jerky, peanut butter, and other non-perishables. A water canteen clanked against the side, a steady companion to his journey. As he continued on the path, the forest whispered secrets, leaves rustling and birds chattering like an audience welcoming the solitary traveler. As Mark approached the next designated campsite, something strange shattered the serene ambiance. He began to hear faint footsteps and rustling leaves. A tension hung in the air, a palpable disturbance in the usual symphony of nature. At first, he brushed off the sounds as the typical commotion of animals in the woods, some curious critter, maybe a deer or a raccoon, casually strolling through their shared home. But the sounds grew more pronounced, more deliberate. An uncanny sense of being observed began to gnaw at him. Heart-pounding, Mark's mind raced, his steps quickened, and he couldn't help but look over his shoulder at the endless forest around him. Then, amidst the chorus of forest whispers, he heard a new sound, distinct from the others. It was the soothing gurgling of running water. Mark frowned, perplexed, for there was no marked water source on his map. However, his water bottles were near empty, and the prospect of replenishing his supply was alluring. Hesitantly, he decided to veer off the trail, marked by the underbrush and the alignment of tall trees. An inner voice reminded him to remember his surroundings to find his way back. But curiosity urged him onward. The sound of running water grew louder with each step, evolving into a melodious, thunderous roar. Mark's heart raced in anticipation, and then, through a natural veil of greenery, he saw it. The waterfall was a breathtaking vision, a wonder of nature, where crystalline water cascaded from an imposing height, its torrents sparkling like liquid diamonds in the sunlight. Mark's heart skipped a beat, and an exultant joy washed over him. It was as though nature had gifted him this enchanting oasis. He made his way down to the edge of the water, where the invigorating spray of the cascade felt like nature's embrace. He filled his water bottles, quenching his thirst with the purest of waters. After a day of walking, Mark's body craved rest, and the seductive pull of the waterfall's soothing rumble convinced him to spend the night. He gathered rocks for a makeshift fire ring and set up his campsite nearby. As he kindled the fire, casting dancing shadows among the trees, the reverberating symphony of the waterfall sang him to sleep under a star-studded sky. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows that reached out like spectral fingers, John sensed an eerie presence enveloping him. He knew it was all in his head, that the solitude of the woods could play tricks on the mind. But still, an overwhelming feeling of being watched persisted. Doubt and unease gnawed at him as he prepared his dinner, a pouch of fettuccine alfredo under the dimming twilight. He watched the flames dance in his small campfire, their erratic flickers a reflection of his own disquieted thoughts. "Get a grip, John," he whispered to himself, while stirring the pasta, his voice barely above a murmur. "It's just your imagination, the isolation getting to you. Nothing's out there." But as he ate his meal, he couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes on him. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the forest plunged into darkness. With only the campfire for company, he had no choice but to retreat into the solace of his tent. Zipping up the tent flap, he lay on his back, gazing at the ceiling. The thunderous cascade of the waterfall continued to drown out any other sound, shrouding him in an eerie blanket of white noise. Yet, the feeling of being watched intensified, a suffocating weight on his chest. John knew he had to quell his paranoia, to regain control over his own thoughts. He focused on his breathing and attempted to let the peaceful roar of the waterfall lull him into slumber. Hours passed in the void of sleep, and when John awoke, he was met with a deafening silence. Panic surged within him as he realized that the comforting roar of the waterfall had vanished. The once persistent white noise was replaced with nothingness. Tension filled the air as he listened intently for any familiar sound. But there was only the stillness of the forest. And then, the footsteps returned. But they were different, more deliberate than before. This wasn't a woodland creature. These were calculated steps, those of something unknown and unsettling. The thing circled John's tent, its presence like a suffocating shroud. It paused in front of the tent's entrance, creating a wall of uncertainty. Heart pounding, John summoned the courage to unzip the tent's flap and peered outside. To his shock, there was nothing but darkness. The forest around him was blanketed in inky blackness, concealing any clues that could help him understand his predicament. With a trembling hand, he swung his flashlight around in every direction, but the beam revealed only the gnarled branches and thick underbrush. Nothing out of the ordinary. He couldn't even see the contours of the waterfall in the distance. His racing thoughts plunged him into a maelstrom of panic. How had he been moved from the site he'd set up next to the waterfall? The full moon hung ominously above him, casting an eerie pallor on his surroundings. Then, the footsteps began again, louder and more insistent this time. But that wasn't the most chilling part. John heard his own voice, echoing from the shadows of the tree line. It was his voice, but distorted, imploring, begging for help. "Help me!" it cried. "Please, come help me!" The sense of foreboding reached its zenith when, from the inky darkness to his right, hysterical laughter rang out. John swung his flashlight in that direction and barely caught the outline of a figure, something that resembled a deer or some four-legged creature. But before his eyes, the creature stood on two legs and turned to face him, the baleful light revealing its grotesque and unnatural features. His mind screamed at him to run, to flee from this otherworldly menace. With no other choice, John bolted blindly into the tree line. With a heart pounding in his chest, John raced through the forest, every muscle screaming for respite. The cacophony of thudding footsteps and maniacal laughter pursued him like relentless demons. He stumbled over roots, crashed through underbrush, and felt branches and bushes clawing at his battered body. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his vision blurred as he plummeted down a steep hill. Rocks and trees became his frenemies as he careened, feeling something snap painfully in his shoulder. He tumbled and rolled until, at last, he came to a rest on soft dirt. With grim determination, he gathered himself, his flashlight's feeble beam revealing his dire condition. The blinding pain coursing through him couldn't stifle his determination to survive. The broken branches of his flashlight lay shattered around him, his backpack nowhere in sight. There was nothing but darkness and the wilderness that had become his prison. John's body bore the marks of his frantic escape: a sprained ankle, a knee that throbbed with a dark bruise, a broken shoulder, and ribs that sent shards of pain with every breath. Before he could fully assess his dire situation, the laughter, chillingly echoing his own, once again emerged from the shadows of the woods. The thudding footsteps grew louder, more persistent, like a relentless drumbeat. Fighting through the searing pain, John clambered to his feet. There was no choice but to keep moving. He sprinted down the trail, his tortured body struggling to keep pace with his frantic mind. In the hours of relentless running that followed, he eventually realized that he was no longer being pursued. The moonlight began to wane as dawn broke, and the nightmare seemed to subside. With the rising sun casting long shadows, John's haggard and broken form continued down the trail. His map indicated that this stretch of abandoned trail would, with any luck, lead him to the next town, only about 10 miles away. As he stumbled forward, battered, bruised, and without his gear, he heard the laughter from the woods again. Distant, but unmistakable. Dread constricted his heart for only a moment, until he heard a blood-curdling scream follow shortly after. Some other poor hiker had fallen victim to the fate he had just narrowly avoided. Picking up the pace towards the nearest town, there was only one thought on his mind: Skinwalker.